Christmas is about the true history, not a mythical story. For many people, Christmas is a cooked up story. It's a myth. It was created some 2000 years ago. For them, Jesus never lived on earth. For some other people, Jesus lived on earth. He was born just like every other person, and he was a human, and then he was never a god. Some other people made him God. So people think he was just an ordinary man. Are these assumptions true? No, they are not. Christianity is rooted on facts. It is not rooted on a myth. It is not a fairy tale or legend. It's rooted in real events involving real people in a real place and time in the history. If Jesus is just like any other person, then we don't need to worship him. He's just like another man. There's no Christianity. If anybody who worships him is like a fool. Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. So you can see how the gospel narratives have written. Here, Luke, a physician that we know from the Bible, he writes this story and he begins saying, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught." So he's saying that people saw Jesus, people witnessed what Jesus was, what he did, and then he also saw and heard of those things, and then he wanted to write an orderly account. And then if you see book of Matthew, that is the first book in the New Testament, if you turn to Matthew chapter 1, Matthew's gospel begins with the genealogy of Jesus. It says the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And then it gives whole list of the people's name, tracing history of Jesus, where he was from. These things concerning Jesus Christ, they go back to thousands of years. The first prophecy about Jesus was spoken in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve. We don't know the year. It was so many years back that we can say. But later on, we come to Abraham. God spoke to Abraham about Jesus coming. In your seed, all the nations will be blessed. They will all be saved. That means through Christ, everyone will be saved. So Abraham lived about 2000 years BC. And then later on, God spoke to David. That was about 1500 BC. And then later on, God spoke to Isaiah. That was about 700 BC. The coming of Jesus was foretold years back before he came to this earth. Now, all these things are coming to take place in about BC 4. So what do we see from all these things? If you read a storybook, what would you say when you want to share a story with your child? What would you say? Once upon a time there was a so-and-so. Even the Star Wars movies begin with like that, right? Once upon a time, there was so-and-so. The Bible never began like that. The account of Jesus was never began like that because it was not a story. It was a real event that happened in real place and time in history. We can see that it is not a myth. Once upon a time signals that this probably didn't happen, or that we don't know if it had happened. But it is a beautiful story that teaches us so much, but that's not the Gospel's story about Jesus. The story of Jesus is real. These people who are writing the accounts of Jesus, the biographers of Jesus, they saw or they heard from the eyewitnesses, and then they wrote down.